One. Welcome back to the Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast. The top 10 returns. My favorite show returns to the channel. It's been a while since we've done one of these. So to bring the top 10 back, I had to bring back a guest. And it would be as everybody knows, I'm a big dart fan. And everybody knows before who my favorite dart player was when I was watching darts, at least in my 20s and 30s. That being the asset, Paul Nicholson. And Paul is back for the top 10. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Great to have you back on the show.
Great to have you back. It's really weird, Paul. I was just literally saying this to myself before you come into the chat room. Since you've come on, one of our favorite wrestlers went to AEW, kind of got fired from AEW, went back to AEW, got fired again, and then went back to the WWE. It just kind of proves in this world that I suppose hell does freeze over.
Yeah, it really does. And I suppose it's inspirational to a lot of people thinking that the door is never closed.
Mm.
Now, if you'd have asked me 2 or 3 years ago that he'd be walking into a Survivor Series in a pair of jeans and a white t-shirt and a pair of trainers, I would have said, no, that's not very likely, is it? So when he did, and the faces of the other wrestlers, and we know what it's like, some of them probably knew about it. But the fact is, that was a moment that a lot of people had waited a long time for. Just to have that moment of, wow, it actually happened. And that has now set a precedent for the future that even if you don't have a great working relationship with WWE anymore, but your profile is as such, maybe you can bring yourself back and have another moment.
Yeah, certainly so. And it certainly seems like he's having fun in the WWE, at least for now, hopefully. And hopefully that stays the same. But speaking of having fun, obviously the top 10. So, top 10 people that have never won the world championship. Now, full disclosure for everybody, although I didn't tell Paul this until he's come on, I did narrow it down to a couple of organizations. I know Paul was going to be pretty much sticking to the WWE side of things for yours. But when you were looking through the list, Paul, just quickly, was you reading off some of these names and thinking, how have they never won a world title?
Yeah, it's it took me a couple of days to look at this list, and there were a couple of them. I'm looking at the list thinking, I've got to double check this because I remember what the profile was of certain wrestlers when I was growing up, and
Yeah.
you automatically think because they were front and center and they were one of the best selling action figures and things like that, that they must have been holding a world title. And then you realize not everybody can hold it at the same time. So you can have Sergeant Slaughter with a belt around his waist, but there are other people who just maybe didn't fit the bill at the time of the heel or the ultimate face when, let's face it, Hulk Hogan wanted to have the belt around his waist for about 20 years. But there are going to be people who missed out and they missed their window. So not everybody can have it.
That's it. That's exactly that. So it's going to be an interesting list. So as I've mentioned, Paul's going to be mainly focusing on WWE. I have done my list based on not WWE, not WCW, not TNA, not AEW. So for all my NWA fans out there and for any NWA wrestlers, I know that you watch because you come on here and berate us when you come on. So I've not included the NWA, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, federation. So full disclosure out there. Anyway, let's crack on. Paul, who is your number 10 in your list?
Ravishing Rick Rude.
Lovely.
Let's face it, when he was having a go at the Ultimate Warrior
Mhm.
and he was speaking on the microphone with Bobby Heenan taking his robe off, and you think, come on, this is probably the best gimmick of the time,
Yeah.
you know. And maybe some of the things he said on the microphone were of the time, but his physique, his ability to take a decent bump, and the whole product, it worked.
Yeah.
And the fact that he wasn't a champion, let's face it, he's one of the first people I remember having a belt over his shoulder.
Yeah.
Now, that might seem like a really trivial thing, but when you got Hulk Hogan or Ultimate Warrior running or walking or being led to the ring in a very small ring with wheels on it, they had the belt around their waist.
Yeah.
That's how it was supposed to be. But I remember Rick Rude having the Intercontinental title over his shoulder, and I thought, damn, that looks cool. And then Bret Hart would do the same, and I thought, there's not everybody does this.
Right.
So he made it look cool that way. And even when he took the robe off and the belt was underneath, he had the lot for me. And he was a tremendous heel, but very surprised to see that he didn't get the world title.
Yeah, he's on my list, just higher up than 10, so that's good. But also I remember him wearing the tights of his opponent, or he used to have the face of Miss Elizabeth if he was taking on Randy Savage as well. So that's a really good pick, and he's, as I said, he's on my list. My number 10, I kind of went back a little bit, not too far, but I remember in the 80s, and this was more WCW initially, when he debuted, he was a real revolutionary talent. He had high flying. He had a great technical ability. Unfortunately, he kind of probably lived by his nickname a lot, which was the loose cannon. That being Brian Pillman.
Yeah.
And obviously, we all remember the Monday Night Raw when he fired the gun and Austin was in the house and the Raw went off the air. But looking back, and unfortunately, it's probably a case of injuries and ill health, Paul, but Brian Pillman is somebody that probably should have won the world title, but a bit like Rick Rude, never got round to doing it.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. He was a big name. He had a presence. He he was very much a product of the Attitude Era of sorts
Yeah,
because he was risky,
yeah.
and sometimes riskiness doesn't get you far. But you felt like with him, riskiness was going to take him to that next level. Maybe the line was very, very close.
Hmm.
I've got a little story for you from back when I was at
Go.
school about Brian Pillman,
Yeah.
because one guy turned up in my high school and he had a bit of dandruff. And next thing you know, one of my buddies said, check out this guy with the dandruff. He looks like Brian Pillman because of the chalk everywhere. And you think, oh, well, that's a ubiquitous thing to say, isn't it? It must have been a big deal if someone at school was likening someone like that to Brian
Yeah.
Pillman. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, it's a brilliant one. I love Brian Pillman. It's again shame that he's took the life his life went too soon. But Paul, number 9 for you now. Who's on your list?
Jake the Snake Roberts.
Yes, he's higher up mine, but yes, he's there.
Yeah, I think purely because of uh, the amount of fans that he had, the gimmick, the whole. I mean, what from a wrestling point of view, I didn't see him as a great uh, overall technician, but
Yeah.
boy, could he deliver a DDT well. So, in order to be a world champion, you've got to have a decent finish. And
Yeah.
has anybody ever done a DDT as well as Jake Roberts?
No.
Probably not. I mean, his story with DDP and all of that
Yeah.
turns him into a different type of great these days. But in my opinion, still a bit like Ravishing Rick Rude, a product of the time, and had great rivalries with Macho Man and Rick Martel and people like that. And it's surprising that he wasn't elevated even for just a short time to get that belt.
Quite interesting. We had him on the show, and he said that the reason why he didn't get the championship was him. Funnily enough, his issues and whatnot. But yes, I remember the blindfold match with Rick Martel. We always remember the snake biting Randy Savage's arm, of
Yeah.
course, which was a tremendous storyline. And he had one with the Undertaker as well. And if I remember, the Undertaker stopped him from hitting, maybe even been Savage with a chair, and that started off leading into the WrestleMania match. But what a guy he was, and yes, he's on my list, just a bit further up my list. But number 9 for me, I had to have a Brit on the list. I did. And it was a toss up. It was either going to be Wade Barrett because I felt that the WWE messed that up with him. I think again, someone that was there, it was just the era of the Super Cena. And unless what Cena done a couple of weeks ago, unless that had happened back then, it was never going to happen for Wade, unfortunately. So that went off my list. So the guy that I brought on, it was just a technical genius. Again, he had some issues. I mean, the biggest issue that you did in WCW was you kind of piss off Bill Goldberg by showing his weaknesses in a match, which didn't really help. But he was a technical genius. I love watching his matches, and I will say a name that's a controversial. I remember a match on Velocity against Chris Benoit, which was out of this world. He's done brilliant GMs, whatever you want, NXT GM, GM of Raw, King of the Ring, Intercontinental Champion. But I had to have, and a man of some great faces and facial expressions as well. And that's William Regal, Paul. I had to put him on number 9 for me.
he's old school, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, you could put him in an old school match, and it would be all about fisticuffs and corner chops and stuff like that. He could hold it with Ric Flair, but at the same time, you could get him in a technical match with Shawn Michaels, and he could hold his own with that. So I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's just again, I suppose lots of other issues, and maybe just didn't fit, as you said back then. There was a standard as to what a wrestler would look like, even, and he didn't have that physique or anything. He could just go bell to bell, and he would out wrestle anybody, or in Bill Goldberg's case, show him how to wrestle for 6 minutes. But yeah, that is the case. But let's move on, Paul. Your number 8 on your list is
The Dragon, Ricky Steamboat.
yes, yeah,
Now, I'm a big fan of people who can fly
yeah,
and who can just do it all well. But maybe what Ricky Steamboat was lacking was a microphone presence
yeah,
where he could relay different moods or different sides of his personality to the audience. Now, we have seen people win titles over the last few years who are from different countries, especially in women's wrestling with the Japanese wrestlers like Asuka and people like that. But this is a different time. We've talked about, other people of that age like Randy Savage and others who had titles. But what Macho Man had that Ricky Steamboat didn't have was that ability to relay to Mean Gene or anybody like that just what was going to happen on the next show or the next pay-per-view. It was all very safe, and that was I think he tried to let his technical abilities sing, but it did not to the degree of someone else.
yeah. No, I agree with that. Ricky Steamboat was one of his. I remember that. Remember WrestleMania 25 when he was like when Jericho was facing Mickey Rourke and all these other guys, and he just he busted out some moves like he was back in his heyday. It was great. Ricky Steamboat was a great guy, but yeah, you're probably right on that one with Ricky. It's a shame because again, but it was just so hard, isn't it? That again, that was Hulkamania and whatnot else, and just so much other politics, I suppose, back
Yeah,
in those
I, I,
days.
I actually think as well, Adam, that there are wrestlers who are as technically sound as Ricky was in this era and have had to work extra hard
Hmm.
on their microphone skills and their ability to connect. And if I'm going to give you an example, it's one of my top three wrestlers of all time that I've seen up close, and that's AJ Styles.
Hmm.
And I never got to see Ricky Steamboat live, but I got to see AJ in Nottingham. And I'm sitting in my seat about 10 rows back, just going, I didn't realize a human could fly that high. And still to this day, it's the best technical wrestler I've ever seen. But you don't associate personality with AJ. You
No.
associate him with technical offense brilliance
Yeah.
and ability to make someone else feel great as an opponent. So maybe in the same sort of way. I mean, AJ's had titles, of course,
Yeah.
all over the world. But yeah, Ricky Steamboat seemed to lack in that personality department with the connection as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I think you could argue with Wade Barrett, and that could be accent issues as well, right? Because he's a Brit, and not nowadays it's a bit different. But yeah, back then Wade Barrett may not have connected or resonated. People hated him because if he was the group he was in, but maybe not resonated enough in terms of accents. But my number 8, and you've already mentioned him, was Rick Rude. I think there's another guy up on my list a bit further when you talk about heels and what a heel is or was. Maybe be a bit different nowadays. You can be cheered as a heel nowadays, and it's all okay. But he had the look, he had the promo, he had, as you said, Bobby Heenan was undressing him, and he used to take the mick out of people in the crowd, and he used to do all of that. And again, he was a great heel. Everything he done was great in the ring. He was again a lot of technical guys in this. Rick had a little technical side to him, but I always find it may have been one of those things, even to this day, where technical wrestlers, Paul, maybe don't get the credit that they deserve in that ring.
I think that's very fair. They have to work extremely hard to
Hmm.
be as technically sound as they are. But you have to have everything to be able to carry your belt. It's as simple as that.
Hmm.
And Rick Rude had great technical ability. He could sail across a ring he could be thrown into the corner by
Yep.
someone more powerful than him, and he would go at a speed that maybe nobody else ever has
Yeah.
because he was able to take that bump in the corner and travel. He was a fabulous specimen. But obviously, he was flexible and strong and was able to make everybody look a little bit better than possibly they were. And I'm talking about the Ultimate Warrior
Yeah.
because he was terrible technically. But I think one of the biggest tributes that Rick Rude had, even though they weren't related, was the ability for Bobby Roode to come out with the robe on
Yeah.
and somewhat say, "Do you know what? I'm not related to him, but how about we do it Flair or let's say Ravishing Rick Rude style?" And it sold for me.
Yeah, it did. It did. And again, it is a real shame that he didn't get the opportunity that he deserved. Paul, we're getting up this list a little bit now. Number 7 on your list. Who is
I,
that?
I don't know if you're going to be surprised by this one or not. I've gone for Dustin Rhodes or Gold Dust.
Very interesting pick. Very interesting pick.
You think about capability in the ring, shed loads of it,
Mhm.
okay? Ability to sell a character, he's probably in the top 1%. I mean, doing the Goldust character can't have been easy. And how
No.
much time did he spend on makeup for crying out loud and squeezing himself into that suit? But it was a character that was seen as somewhat comedic.
Hmm.
But I think it's something that even now we can say, what a great job he did,
Yeah.
especially with all of the other things involved. I mean, there was the stuttering and the ability to make other people laugh, like Booker T and some others. I think if he'd won a title as a heel,
Mm.
I think even the fans would have said, "Do you know what? That's pretty good." That
Yeah.
I think Dustin Rhodes is an amazing wrestler from an incredible family, and there's been a lot of talk on social media over the last say 6 to 9 months.
Mm.
What about his story? When does he get to finish his? And I just wonder if he ever will.
Well, I don't know. That is a very interesting pick. I didn't. The reason why I didn't think of Dustin is my number seven's his dad. Funnily enough, but it was my number 7 was so hard because I really wanted the British Bulldog in there, but I don't know. I just thought that you mentioned it kind of there. Dustin was a man of many traits. He could do. You mentioned Gold Dust. There, that hideous 7, I think, in WCW, which lasted about 10 minutes before he, and then he had like a cowboy like you would normally be, and now he's the last outlaw, I think, in AEW. And you're right. Will he ever get to finish his story? We don't know. So it was a toss up anyway between British Bulldog and Dusty. I just felt that Dusty what never got British Bulldog got the Intercontinental Championship. Dusty, I think, did win the NWA title, to be fair. But he was always I always thought he was like the nearly man of it. And then I think eventually he just went as, he was just then a good hand for the WWE. Like a bit like although he did win the title in the end, like a Dolph Ziggler was for many, many years in the WWE. Like, we want someone to put somebody over. I will give it to Dusty or we'll give it to Dolph now. But Paul, for me, Dusty Rose had the charisma. In ring, maybe not so great. He could cut a promo. He had energy. The crowd loved him. They just never pulled the trigger on him.
Yeah, that's totally true. I mean, as kids at school, we tried to do impressions of Dusty Rhodes, and we would do a terrible job.
I didn't even want to
But
go there.
the funniest thing was, I mean, of that age, we didn't have as many high. I mean, the highest flyer was probably Ricky Steamboat or
Mm,
possibly Jimmy Superfly Snooker Macho Man.
yeah.
But the thing is, recognizability. Now, if I was to go up to any wrestling fan in the street and just give them one of them,
Mm,
they'd say it's Dusty Rhodes.
yeah.
Something as simple as an elbow to the top of the head. They'd think, oh, that's Dusty Rhodes, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But imagine having that recognizability with
Yeah.
something so simple. And maybe that's one of the great things about Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah, it definitely was. It's just, again, they just never know why they didn't with these things. And we're not the people that know. That's the bottom line. The people that know, some of them are here, some of them are not anymore. But he should have been world champion, in my opinion. We're getting near the halfway point here. Number 6, Paul, on your list. Who is that?
Matt Hardy.
Oh, so he's yes. So he did win. Full disclosure, he did win the ECW, the crap version of it. So that doesn't count.
Yeah. I think when I look back at Matt's career, obviously one of his best pops was with Jeff when they came back to
Yes.
WrestleMania. I mean, that was remarkable.
Yeah.
But and they tried to piggyback off the whole delete, delete, delete thing,
Yeah.
which was very, very good. But there were times when they could have pushed him a bit more with the Lita situation
Mm.
against Edge, this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Edge got a lot of pushes,
Yeah.
but Matt didn't seem to get that
Mm.
for whatever reason. Uh, it may be because he was in such an amazing tag team. But then again, Jeff got the push.
Yeah.
So why not Matt? And he was maybe not as risque with some of the Daredevil moves, but
Mm.
still worthy of a title at some point.
Yeah, do you think that's why though? That you always say in tag teams you get a Shawn Michaels and a Marty Jannetty, right? That's the kind of thing, right? Do you think that Jeff was just because he was that exciting Daredevil? He may have got the bigger reaction than Matt in a if it was a singles match. Do you reckon that's why they kind of pushed it to him instead of Matt? And we go back to Matt was great technically, where Jeff does the exciting stuff. So again, are we saying it's a technical thing here?
It could be very much so, because Matt's been recognizable in every company he's gone to, and has he had that extra 1% that somebody's had on the mic? Has he had that extra 1% to do that one crazy thing that maybe someone like Jeff or AJ Styles or someone like that has he gone to that degree? There's an argument to say no, but there were enough spots for him over the years to be given the mantle. And again, for some reason, the powers that be said, you know what? Maybe he's not our right now guy.
Hmm. Maybe that is an interesting. I guess say Jeff got it, Matt didn't. It's an interesting one. My number six. So technically, he did win the WWF Championship. Well, he bought it off Andre the Giant at the time, so it doesn't count. Everyone, I mean, it certainly doesn't count. Million Dollar Man, Ted DiBiase. We're talking about great heels.
Yeah.
Again, he had it. He had that. Everyone hated him. He was picking out people to kiss his feet for money. He put money in the guy's mouth when he finished it. He had a sleeper, which nowadays the only time someone wins a match with a sleeper is in NWA, unless it's a UFC style choke. I just thought he had everything. He had the laugh, and no, I'm not going to do it. He had the laugh. He had Virgil for a point in that turnaround, but I don't know. Again, that could just simply be Hulkamania, Paul, just making sure that didn't happen. I don't know.
I think that's very fair to say that, because if you think about let's be honest, about a 6 or 7 year period where you look at WrestleMania main events, it's Andre, it's Hulk Hogan, it's Ultimate Warrior, it's Macho Man, and Million Dollar Man was just a level below that. He
Yeah.
was he was in the middle of the show towards the end, whereas he'd never be at the very end. He's actually on my list a little bit further up as the Million Dollar Man. And I think anybody who's compiling a list like this would think, surely I mean, he was very decent as a wrestler. He was a great opponent for some people.
Yeah.
Like Rick Rude, he was able to speed around the ring. Wasn't a specimen of a guy, but he would be a darn sight quicker than Hacksaw Jim Duggan, that's for sure. But everything associated with him, the big push with the money, the lifestyle, the belt, which is still awesome to this day. And I loved the moment when Virgil turned on him. It was terrific. So I'm surprised with his sway based on character that Ted DiBiase didn't get the big one.
Do you think physique played a part in that? Because we were talking, this was the early to late, early to mid 90s, where it was a larger than life, comic book, warrior muscles in places we haven't got places, and Hogan, even Savage, they all had physiques. Is that something that could have possibly been missing, the reason why they did? Because he didn't look like a champion in a sense.
Well, this has happened with some people, hasn't it?
Mm,
They've come into WWE and they've obviously got ability and
mhm.
they've got presence, but they are convinced by the powers that be that maybe they should diet differently, train differently. And I mean, I met Bobby Roode, what was it, 14 years ago for the first
Yeah.
time? Big lad,
Yeah.
spent a day together. Great guy. But then by the time he got to WWE, he was a different animal. He was slimmer. and he was more shredded. And you think, well, there's obviously something going on with the way that they train there and the way they're able to mold themselves a bit more. And to be fair to Bobby, he was given a bit of a push in WWE. But there were other wrestlers back in this time that weren't necessarily specimens. I mean, Sergeant Slaughter is a great example of this.
Mhm.
So he was pretty much fully clothed when he was wrestling for the
Yeah.
WWF title. But then again, people in that mold, they were specimen. I mean, the Iron Sheik was a specimen.
Yeah.
He
Washboard
was
abs.
he was absolutely ripped.
Yeah.
So who knows what could have been for Ted DiBiase if he'd looked a bit more like Rick Rude or maybe a little bit more like Davey Boy Smith.
Yeah, we won't know, unfortunately, now back in then. But now we're halfway through the top 10 list, Paul. And obviously, this is the upper echelons of lists now. We hit to number five. Who is your five on your list?
It is the British Bulldog.
Oh, is it? There you go.
Yeah, I felt like I had to put somebody British in there
Yeah.
because not many people from this side of the pond do get to the end of the rainbow. I mean, I think in the last 10 years, one of the most technically gifted wrestlers
Mhm.
is still wrestling in WWE. And I still think that he can get to the end of the rainbow, which is Finn Balor. I
Yes.
think, I think he's phenomenal. Maybe not as phenomenal as AJ because that's my personal opinion, but he's definitely got something. But the Bulldog had the story with Brett.
Yeah.
It had everything to do with how he was brought through the Dynamite Kid, and it would have made. You know, do you remember that when Creed sang a song for Edge when he was getting the biggest push of his career? I
Yeah.
think it was a song called "My Sacrifice."
Yeah, my sacrifice. Loved it. Yeah. Still
Yeah,
got it on
yeah.
my still got it on my
I
iPhone.
loved that piece of footage and the music put with it. And I thought at that time, as much as I loved it, I thought, hang on a minute, I reckon Davy Boy Smith could do with something like that
Mm.
when he was at his peak. But we know probably why he wasn't given that push because there were other things in play. And Bret Hart um, has told a lot of us at these dinners that we've been to around the UK because I actually know the guy who booked him, a guy called Matt Ward,
Mm.
and he had me sit next to Bret for the night, and he was telling me, look, that there will be something come out that I'll talk candidly about Davy Boy not getting a push because of certain things that were in play in his personal life. So that'll be why. But for someone who was seen as a bit of a national hero for a while and headlining a big Wembley event,
Mm.
it's sort of a shame that he didn't get that moment, but you can understand why.
Yeah, you can, and I've not necessarily, I've not sat next to Brett, but I went to a one night show with Brett, and yes, he went into detail why, and he's coming back actually in September with Inside the Ropes. My co-host Fiona will be overseeing the meet and greet side of things. So yes, I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I agree. We know why. It's just a shame that it never happened because he would have been the first Brit to have done it. That's another thing, and there has obviously been some since, but unfortunately, it didn't make it. My number five, funnily enough, is his brother,
Okay.
Owen. Um, he was he was definitely a joker. I mean, every time you get someone on, you speak to somebody that was in his era of wrestling, and he will always tell you a funny Owen story. There'll always be he was a joke. Obviously, he was loved backstage. There was no doubt about that. In the ring, I don't know if he on par with Brett, maybe. The great heel turn that he done. I remember when he threw the towel in when Brett was facing Bob Backlund, and Bob had Brett in the chicken wing for what felt like forever, and everything was there. He had all the tools to do it. Um, should he have won it? I don't know. I mean, obviously, it come out that apparently they did have plans for him to win the title, but we don't know if that was just said because of, obviously we know what happened to him. Maybe Paul, if he had jumped with his brother to WCW, had he given a chance, who knows what might have happened. But Owen Hart, for me, Paul, definitely deserved the opportunity.
Yeah, I have to agree. He was pretty close to my top 10 as well. Uh, I get the feeling that maybe one of the reasons why was, and you go back to the Stone Cold Steve Austin incident with the pile driver,
Yeah.
is that they saw him possibly as a risk that if
Mhm.
we want you to go in this direction, we want you to do this, 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 and this,
Mm.
but he would still believe somewhat blatantly that I believe this deserves to be in there anyway. So they saw him as a risk. He wouldn't stick to script. He wouldn't. Uh, I think from a safety point of view, to work with him, I'm sure would have been on the whole very, very good.
Yeah.
But there were maybe one or two incidents where people said, "Oh, hang on a minute, you weren't supposed to do that. Look what happened as a result." So I think he wore the tag of uh, someone who was a little bit risky for a long time after the Stone Cold Steve Austin pile driver,
Yeah.
and I suppose you can understand that he broke his neck.
Yeah, exactly that. And then that probably would have been the case. And obviously, shame, obviously, everything that happened with that. And yeah, we'll never find out, obviously, due to tragic reasons. So it's a shame, but Owen Hart, it will be the King of Hearts forever, that's for sure. But would never, fortunately, got to the top of that mountain. Um, we're getting into the top four now, which is, I know, where your beloved Newcastle want to finish. Big Cup final coming up this weekend. My son's team is Liverpool, so I'm sorry. As you know, I'm Spurs, so I can't say anything about it. So
Well, I think I should be saying sorry to Liverpool fans today because I watched that game last night until the very end, and it was just you couldn't take your eyes off it. It was, I mean, Paris Saint-Germain. That's the best Paris Saint-Germain I've seen in ages.
yeah,
They've got some very good talent, and they look better without Mbappe and without Neymar. I think Dembele is reborn.
yeah.
So fair play to PSG, but yeah, I'm sure Liverpool fans will be good today.
Yeah, they probably will be. And again, got a chance to this weekend to rectify that at your guys' expense. We'll see. We will
Agree.
see. We'll see. But anyway, the top four is where I was getting at. And your four, Paul, is who?
Teddy Biasi.
Oh, brilliant.
And that was your best impression of the laugh, right?
No, it was. There you go. I've done a bit there. No, no way am I doing that. But no, that probably was. Yeah, that was my best impression of the laugh.
I would love to have a text tone that is exactly like the laugh of Ted DiBiase. Now, I've got a friend in Ireland called Alan Keown who does a few meet and greets with wrestlers from over the pond, and he actually invited me to go over and meet Ted once, but I was indisposed and I couldn't go over, and he got loads of little sound bites out of him and put them on his text tones on his phone and things like that. And I thought, this is all for someone who was never the champ, and it just goes to show how iconic he was.
Yeah, he certainly was. I think Inside the Ropes done a tour with him. I want to say, have they got one coming up, or I know they got Jim Duggan coming up. I can't remember if they got. I'm sure they got Ted DiBiase as well. They just finished one with. I can't even remember who they finished one with. To be fair, that's my bad. Sorry, Fee. I should know these things because you tell me every week. But yeah, Ted DiBiase, I'd love it. I'd love that laugh as well. I think that would be tremendous. But yeah, I'm not going to do it. He was a great, great, great wrestler for sure. My four, I mean, in terms of like instrumental of what the Attitude Era, he was part of one of the greatest groups ever. And he debuted, well, he didn't say debuted, he returned to WCW in a moment that kick-started everything with the words were you know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. And that was Scott Hall. Iconic. Oh, and again, we will probably know why, Paul, he didn't win the World Heavyweight Championship. But he literally, if we talk about guys that had everything,
Mm.
that's Scott Hall.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you'll hear me say his name again in a minute because he's on my list. I think everybody knows where they were when they first saw him walk out in that denim
Yeah.
jacket with no sleeves, and it was the look on his face, and
Mhm.
it was somewhat smug. One of, you haven't got a clue what's going on. This is all part of a bit, but you've got no idea what's real anymore.
Mm.
And they didn't choose Kevin Nash to do that bit.
No.
They chose Scott Hall to do that bit.
Yeah.
So the fact that the guy who started all of this didn't get the championship, even with his own issues, blimey. That for me is that's an open goal missed to
Yeah.
say that you started it all, maybe you'll get your bit. And he took second fiddle in the end, which I found very surprising.
Or even third fiddle, but behind Hogan and Nash, really.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
terms of championships, that's for sure. I mean, I remember even I remember these old WWF vignettes when he was just walking in the streets of, I mean, Miami or wherever it was with his toothpick, and he would throw that, and he would throw the toothpick at the guy that was taking it. Something happened to this gold, something will happen to you, is what he used to say to the timekeeper. He was great, and I just, yeah, I mean, obviously we know, again, we probably know why he didn't go and win it, but hey ho, he is still to this day, again, it's a shame, and tragedy strikes, and everything, obviously it all come back to haunt him in the end, unfortunately, even after getting himself sorted through DDP, who, by the way, should be knighted, by the
Yeah,
way, for what the work he's done with Lex Luger. For those of you who haven't seen, go and check that out. But
absolutely.
yeah, Scott Hall was amazing. But it's top three time, Paul. So number three is
I think you will be quite surprised by this.
okay.
And I think a lot of people might be surprised by this. So I've gone for Ken Shamrock.
He was on my honorable mentions.
Yeah, I just feel if you look back at the early days of UFC,
Mhm.
and there were people like Don Fry, and there were the Gracies and things like that. There was so much scope, and I think if WWE or WWF, as it was back then, if they could turn back the clock, they would maybe raid the coffers a bit more.
Mm.
But nowadays, we look at Ronda Rousey, we look at Brock, and we
Yep.
think that's a no brainer for them to go and have the title. But Shamrock was as hard as a coffin nail. I mean, he went in the ring with all the greats,
Yeah.
and he was a specimen too. He would walk, and his back was as wide as his wingspan. And I remember when he was in the octagon match with uh, Steve Blackman, and I
Yep.
thought I was sold on it. You know, I may have been quite young, but I thought actually I think this is a fight. But I get the feeling that they pulled the trigger with Brock when obviously he came back from the UFC,
Mm.
but they had an opportunity to pull the trigger with a legitimate fighter before this,
Yeah.
like they'd done with a legitimate Olympic wrestler like Kurt Angle. So when I look back on it now, I am amazed that they didn't do so because he had so much ability. And like some other people that we've mentioned, maybe he couldn't sell a promo like some others.
Mm.
But from a technical perspective, I think he's very close to the top of the list of the people who should have had the title around his waist.
There was a legitimacy about him as well. You
Mm.
mentioned that about the Blackman thing, and it was, you thought it was, could have been a real fight, and that was the thing as well, because they were used to say, "Oh, Brock Lesnar, when he would come out, he legitimized, he made it look, and you go back and you go, "Wait, Shamrock did that. He would punch himself in the face before he even got in the ring. He would hit the stairs, bang bang on the face, and scream, and then he could do it. He was wrestling moves as well. He wasn't just a UFC fighter. He was a wrestler. He could do it all. So really surprising that they didn't on him. And again, maybe it was a promo reason. I don't know, because he resonated everything. He had it all, but they just
Yeah, this was super early UFC as well. I mean, way before the logo is now. It was
yeah,
old logo when it was just the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And the only reason people had actually heard of it back then was because of Monica's ex-boyfriend on Friends. And then
yeah.
he went on to fight Tank Abbott. I mean, if you'd have brought Tank Abbott into WWF back then, I'm pretty sure they would have given him a title of some description because he would have pulled his teeth out and he would have just gone up and battered people. But the thing about Ken is that he was technically very gifted and very legitimate, and I'm just surprised in hindsight that they didn't give him a shot.
Yeah, very surprising back then as well. Tank Abbott, WCW as well. Didn't win anything, but he was in WCW. They used him pretty well over there. My number three is someone that you've already mentioned earlier on. That was Jake the Snake Roberts. I can't really add much to what you said earlier. I mean, we know the reasons why he has said he was on this channel when he told us why that he didn't. No one could, they literally couldn't trust him. Funnily enough, which was he's one of his mottos back in the day. He just had everything. I can't really say much more that he had everything. Maybe not the look, but you can get away with that when you've got the talent that Jake had. But yeah, I think we'll leave it at that because there's nothing really else to say. We kind of covered everything off in your wing. But number two, this is the top two now. This is the big two. Who is your two?
A man who can walk out to music now, if he was still alive, and people would go, and I still do have that. emotional connection to this walk on music, and that's Mr. Perfect.
He's my two. He's my two.
Yeah, I hear people who have that ringtone, and I just give them a wink and I say, you know. And the promos were brilliant. Technically, he was incredible. I think his overselling of the tornado punch was wrong because he went the wrong way.
Yeah.
I always loved that, but he made everybody look better.
Yeah.
And when he did the perfect plex on Hogan and kicked out, I thought maybe at that point he's just not going to get through this brick wall, is he? Because
Yeah.
you're thinking it's right there. But there were other people who were commanding the top spot more than he was. He was way ahead of his time. I mean, way ahead. So yeah, he's not alive now, but for me, Mr. Perfect will live forever.
I loved it. I remember I remember his vignette when he threw the American football from one end of the pitch, he run to the other end and caught it, and he done the big basketball dunk. And Bobby
Yeah.
Heenan as well was with you couldn't ask for a better man. If he couldn't cut a promo, you'd give it to Heenan, but he could cut a promo. He used to have the towel and he used to throw it over and catch it, and everything else about him was just. I mean, he's my number two. I've got a feeling our number one's maybe the same as well now, thinking about it. But he do you ever get this feeling that sometimes the he needed a title more than the title needed him?
Maybe. I think there might be wrestlers out there who are like that. I think
Mm.
they're happy being who they are. I mean, R-Truth, for instance, is someone who resonates with everyone because he's found a gap in the market.
Yeah.
Someone who is so ridiculous that it becomes a thing. But he doesn't need a title to legitimize who he is. Maybe Kurt Hennig didn't need one for himself, but I think if I was to turn the clock back and hang my hat on someone, it would have to wait for him to toss the hat because he'd toss it perfectly. But he was just a remarkable person in ring and very, very believable out the ring. I think there would have been matches back then you would love to have sold for a 2 or 3 month period. And maybe they didn't happen because he was in a heel time where he was probably going up against some of the greatest heels ever.
Yeah, I remember when he used to kick his leg and he used to flip over the top rope, and I think I remember when he went to TNA and all he kept talking about was beating up Brock Lesnar for the first 5 minutes. But yeah, he was absolutely. I mean, when he returned, I think it was 2002 Royal Rumble or 2000 something like that. Then you say the iconic theme, and there's so many iconic themes in wrestling. He didn't need any words. It was
Mm.
just that whole part of that song was just unreal, and it fit him. If there was he was one of those guys where the character just fit the person.
Yeah,
He was cocky, he was brash, but he was one of those ones that you hate because he backs it up when he comes in. You kind of want to get in the ring and kill him, but you can't because he would just find a way.
yeah,
And he perfect. I mean, that's
absolutely.
simple as that. Shame he didn't work out for his son so much. He was very good as well, very underrated. But
But
it comes to number one. Why do I have a feeling that our number one, I just said this a minute ago, our number ones are going to be the same as well? But go ahead, Paul, and give us your number one.
mine is Scott Hall.
Okay, well, so we're not different. We're not going to be totally different then. Okay.
Yeah, mine is Scott Hall because of, I think it's the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
What we spoke about with the moment when he was walking through the crowd,
Yeah.
I think his iconic matches in WWF, particularly with Shawn Michaels. Now, if you can hang with with Shawn Michaels
Yeah.
in a match like that, you think, hang on, you're not just a bit part player. You're not a B-roll kind of guy.
Mm.
You can hang with one of the greatest that has ever done it
Yeah.
and make him look even better than he is.
Yeah.
Come on, this guy had to have a title, so that's why I believe he's the number one guy, in my opinion, of course.
No, absolutely. And there's this again, it's difficult to argue with that. Although my number one is slightly different. I did mention Scott Hall earlier on in my list. My number one, I always say about this, maybe he just didn't need a title. Again, we talked about that with Mr. Perfect. He could cut a promo. I mean, I remember his match with Brett at WrestleMania. I want to say, oh, it may have been 10, it may have been 8. I can't remember. I just remember him bloodying Brett. Brett had to use the ring post to go over. He promo ability was amazing. He could do it in the ring. Was it a look thing? Was it outside control? But my number one is going to be Rowdy Roddy Piper because I just
Right.
think he had, again, everything that you could want from it. If he was here, I remember when he painted his face half black, half white for WrestleMania that year. No, he wasn't doing a Newcastle, Paul. So that's he wasn't doing that for Newcastle. But no, in all seriousness, though, Roddy Piper, Paul, for me, everything about him was just he hit all the notes for me.
Yeah, that's so true. And when someone's involved in such an early WrestleMania thing, someone so iconic and foundational as well. You think about Hogan and Mr. T being there at the very start.
Yeah,
Piper was there too. So
yeah,
was Paul Orndorff as well. And he
yes,
very nearly made my list.
yes. Paul Orndorff.
Very,
He was
yeah,
on my honourable mentions. Paul
yeah,
Orndorff was
yeah.
on
He
there.
wasn't perfect.
No,
Wonderful.
yeah, he was wonderful, but there was only one perfect in that for sure. But
Yeah.
an incredible top 10 list, Paul. But before we go, look, what's going on in your world? What are you still doing the coaching on the darts now, or is it more focused on the commentary side of things?
Well, it's a question of what I'm not doing these days. I mean, I work a lot in Portsmouth, where I currently reside. We have a project down here called the Motor Super Series,
Yes,
which runs 50 weeks of the year, doing lots of different styles of darts. Now we do double start, we do straight start, we do a lot more this year with our broadcaster at Pluto TV. So
yes,
exciting times ahead for that. I still work a lot for the PDC. I'm going to be going to the European Darts Trophy next week
great.
in Göttingen in Germany, commentating for that. Doing a lot of work for Talksport these days. We have our Darts on the Radio project, which covers the Premier League, and we do the World Match Play and the World Championship. And we've received awards for our coverage, which is very humbling indeed. And I do still coach. It's harder to squeeze things in,
Yeah.
but what I've decided to do recently is to take on my individual clients and then have them coached in Portsmouth instead of up in Surrey, which is where my previous studio was, so they can come to me so I can actually fit them in a bit easier,
Mm,
which is good. But the coaching has, over the last couple of years, completely boomed because people are starting to believe in it now.
mm.
Previously, it was darts coaching's a thing. Now, because the products that are coming through, like Luke Littler and Bo Greaves,
Mm,
they've come from not pub or club atmospheres. They're coming from academy atmospheres where
yeah.
they've been coached. So people have finally twigged and said, well, actually, if they've been coached and they're this good, maybe that's something I can use. And it's gradually becoming a ubiquitous thing, and everybody's starting to get on board with it.
That's great to hear. My son has a dartboard in his bedroom now. He has his Luke Littler top, of course. You know, he's 10. So he comes around Saturday, and the first thing he does is he's got his dart bot thing, and we do a doubles. It's me and him against the computer. We win sometimes. He's better at doubles than me. But one of the guys I wanted to mention to go into the Motor Super Series is another one of my favorite dart players, and I'm actually going to have the pleasure to meet him actually in Brentwood in June. Jackpot, Adrian
Oh, right.
Lewis. Yeah, so he's going to be doing Night at the Darts. I think it's a Modus, I think it may be event.
It is,
Is
yeah.
it Modus event? Yes, Modus event. Adrian Lewis will be there. Nathan Aspinall, one of my favorite current players. Joe Cullen, another one of my favorite current, lots of my favorite current players. Bo Greaves is actually going to be there as well as Bobby George. So that should be fun. If you want to get that, I think if you go to Modus Events, I think it's Modus Events on the internet, you can get, there's loads. They do a load of those events. They are really, really good. I would get down there. If you live in Essex like me, come and see that at the Brentwood Centre. It's going to be a great night. I'm very much looking forward to meeting a few of my heroes. I need to meet you, Paul, at some point because again, another hero of mine, and that's a legitimate thing. If people know me very well, will always know when I was watching darts back in the day. A lot of it was a lot of your wrestling stuff that you brought into darts, and that wasn't just a reason. It was just the character that you put out there was different at the time to what it was kind of like a CM Punk, for argument's sake, of darts, and you know. that's why it certainly resonated with me. I loved it when you won the Players Championship as well. It was great. But yeah, so I'm going to get to meet a few of my heroes then, and I just need to add you to that list at some point. But coming up on the channel, guys, before we go, Gangrel will be coming on very very soon. So that's another Attitude Era one off the list. My co-host Dave is a big Brood fan, so he's gonna love that. Candice Michelle will also be coming on at some point to do a bit of the women's division as well. Now, those of you that know the Hitting the Turnbuckle will know that we have a championship in wrestling that is going to be defended on May the 18th. Our champion has finally decided to show his face after going to Wrestling Noah for a month. He'll be back. He'll be defending the title against number one contender, Luna. So she's finally got her opportunity to win the championship. If you want a ticket, hurry up. There's less than 40 left already, and we've still got 2 months to go before the show. Go to 96 Eventbrite. Type in Ignite the Last Stand. There's a hint of what a match is going to be on there in the title of that program. So there you go for that. And finally, the show that we co-produced with Ignite, Buckle Up, Free, the trilogy, the final one that we're going to put on with Ignite is back. This time we're going to do it in September. We're not going to be stupid to do it on the European Cup final like we did last year for England, or the England European Cup final. So go and get tickets will be on sale in July, I think. So get down there to see that, because we're going to bring some of the biggest names in Brit Rest down for that show. However, Paul, it has been fabulous to have you back on the show. I do appreciate the time you've taken out of your evening to come and do this with me. Again, it's an absolute privilege to talk to you about it. And this time I have had no audio issues like I had last time. So I've wanted to get you back on for a lot of reasons. Number one, you love wrestling. Number two, because the first time I had you on, audio issues played up. But I really do appreciate you coming on and talking some wrestling with me.
No problem whatsoever. It's always great to talk to you. And let's hope the next time we speak, we've got an incredible WrestleMania story to go over.
I think we will do indeed. Guys, keep it locked to our channel at HTT Buckle on X, at HTT Buckle on YouTube, Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast on all social media outlets. Paul, if they want to get hold of you for anything like darts coaching, where can they go?
Best thing to do is get in touch with me on X, which is at the Asset 180. And you can actually go to dartshop.tv, or you can search for Asset Darts Coaching, and that will take you to the Modus page where you can put in an inquiry and you can get a hold of me that way.
There you go, everyone. Make sure you do that if you're a budding darts player. You want to get coached by one of the best. He's right there, and he's been right here on the Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast. And until next time, everybody, from the Asset, Paul Nicholson, this has been your host, Adam Cousins. Buckle down, stay safe, and goodbye.